Again, everyone, thanks a lot for joining today's webinar and welcome. We appreciate your time and I hope you will enjoy this webinar. So as I've already mentioned, this webinar is a part of Primary Public Agency Academy, where we'll be helping agencies to grow. And our today's topic is how to automate your agency to double the clients you serve. And I'm super mega excited to introduce you to our today's speaker, Maddy Osman.
Woo. Excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, we're super happy to have you here today, and thanks a lot for joining. So a bit about Maddy's background. She's a founder of the Blogsmith, and she's also search engine optimization and content strategist for multiple agencies. So she helped to shape content writing style, process, and strategies for dozens of clients worldwide. And we are super excited to see her presentation today. So I think Maddy can go ahead and start with the presentation and a bit about the agenda. So Maddy will present today, and right after this, we'll jump directly to the Q&A session, during which we will do our best to answer all of the questions you have.
Yes, so if anything pops up during the presentation, I would be happy to help answer those questions throughout. So just get them in the chat and then we'll get to them as we get to that point at the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So I won't spend too much time on my intro. That kind of already was done nicely by Paul. I think it's worth mentioning that before I got to agency status, we're going to talk a little bit about the journey to get there for people on this call or on this presentation who are, considering what they need to do to get here, and who, maybe aren't freelancing yet. Maybe you still have a 9-to-5 job. So I just want to share a couple of things that have helped me. So in terms of like taking those very first steps as a freelancer, I just have a couple tips for you. The first one is that you absolutely need a mentor. And I think that no matter what stage you're at in terms of building a business, building an agency, trying to get to the next stage of your career even, you need somebody who's been there before, who's on your side, who's looking out for you, who can give you some good advice. And I think a lot of people hold off on seeking out a mentor because they don't know what they could do to like give back to that person in exchange for their time. One tip that I have for those people who are wondering that is to consider, donating their time to an organization that means a lot to that person. So, that's one way that you can make an impact with a mentor who like already has everything and who's in a different stage of business and life than you are. But this is how my freelance journey started. I was working at a job and I just like wasn't fulfilled in that job. And this person told me that not only did they have some work for me to help me bridge the gap, but they also, offered to be there for me as I sort of figured out that transition. A couple other things, if you're transitioning from a 9-to-5 to a freelance and then an agency job, is like learn as much as you can while you're still on somebody else's payroll. I learned a lot from all the different companies that I worked for before I struck out. And I'm so glad that I didn't just go straight to freelancing because I would have missed out on all those lessons. The other thing is before you take it full-time freelancer agency, try to do your business as a side hustle first to the side of whatever full-time job that you have. So you can test things out. So you can start to kind of like build up all the materials that you're going to need to be successful. And then that way, when you're ready, it won't be so stressful. You won't be like coming up with everything from the get-go, in addition to trying to get paid and, all that good stuff that happens when you start a business. And then save some money because when you're going into freelance agency life, notoriously clients will pay you late. You should expect that in your first several months to years of being a freelancer or an agency owner. So you don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you won't be able to pay the rent or, eat that month because you didn't plan that transition. And, it's something that you kind of learn with hindsight. Like, it's not something that I thought a whole lot about when I was making that jump. And it was mostly because I had kind of like a steady income ready for me from that mentor that I mentioned before. But I wish I would have put more effort into making sure that I had like an emergency fund. So just a couple other things. Build a portfolio before you need it. What I did before I decided that content writing was the thing for me was I started a blog, and it was not a business blog. It was just for fun. It was a proof of concept. It was me trying out different digital marketing things because I was in a sales job at the time and I really wanted to do marketing, but I also wanted to prove it to myself that I could. And so that was kind of the point of doing that. Also in terms of like the marketing niche and even like freelance writing niche, it took a while for me to figure out like what was the one thing that I'm good at, that I want to write about, that people would want to hire me to write about, which ended up being sort of topics in the B2B technology space. But I didn't start out that way. It took me a lot of time to sort of experiment, figure out what I liked, and then land on that. So the other thing is, if you start with a side hustle, those clients can be your initial like case studies and testimonials that you share to get other clients and better clients, bigger clients. And so these are all reasons why before you decide to freelance or start an agency or whatever, you really need to start something so that you can prove that you know what you're doing, and ideally with sort of that cushion of having a job that you could fall back on. So, let's say that you have gone through that stage, you've started your side hustle, and now you're ready to take this business full time. So, a couple months in, you're probably going to start to realize that you can't do everything. You're one person, you have sick days sometimes, you want to go on vacation, on occasion as well. And so the best way to be able to run a business that's successful is to not be an island, not try to do it all by yourself. And so, at some point during your freelance career, in between when you're being a freelancer and sort of scaling towards an agency, you're going to want to consider hiring help. And you're probably going to want to consider doing it before you're really comfortable with it. I think, it's a matter of justifying, like comparing your hourly rate to what you would pay somebody else to do it. And so I have a couple things to think about. So first of all, I've kind of alluded to this, but the idea that hiring help is a way to increase your monthly recurring revenue because it expands your capacity. It also makes it so that you can work on the things that you are uniquely good at, while you could outsource things that like maybe you're not good at, or maybe you just hate doing. So like for me, this is bookkeeping. I hire a bookkeeper. He also does my year-end tax prep at the end of the year. And that's just something that like does not bring me joy. So it makes a lot more sense for him to do it than for me to begrudgingly handle that every month and probably not do it as well as him because he knows, the tax code way better than I do. A couple of ways that I've scaled my team and sort of the progression to getting there. It started with hiring virtual assistants. So that was the first team member or team members that the Blogsmith had. And these were people who were helping me with things like administrative tasks. Maybe I had like research that I wanted them to help me with. Maybe I was considering different tools. And so I wanted them to like research those tools against my specifications to see what's the better fit. They've helped me with things like graphic design. I mean, it's just sort of like the odd jobs that like either I didn't really have a whole lot of time for, or I know that they could do a better job than me, or that it would just make more sense for them to do than for me. So I could focus on growing my business and doing the work, really. So after I started hiring virtual assistants, I realized I do need some specialized help too. And this was especially the case as I decided that I wanted to take my freelance business into an agency model. And so it was at that point that I decided to start hiring some writers, to also start hiring some editors. But the writers came first because I needed to figure out how the editors would interact with them. And so in between the time when I started hiring writers and then I started hiring editors, I put together a style guide for my brand so that the writers would know what I'm expecting, so that I wouldn't have to edit the same things over and over and over again, but also so that the editors could use that to, basically do the job that I was doing. And it was a beautiful thing when that style guide came together, because then I could finally step out of that role of the editor, of the writer, but still understand and have faith in the fact that like the content that these two roles would create together would be consistent with what's true of me and my style and my brand and the high quality that clients expect from me. So it was at that time, once I like got a really good feel for the style guide and felt good about that, that I decided I also needed to bring in someone to help me with like project management and like account management with clients and sort of like moving things forward and also communicating updates to clients. And so, you know, that was kind of a role that I took on for a while after I got out of the writing and the editing and even the tasks that the virtual assistants were doing. And so, you know, all of these things kind of build on each other. And it's really hard to know even like how to hire for these things until you've assumed that role for yourself and you've kind of taken some time to think about like what you do on a daily basis for those roles, and you can, you know, put it in a way that you can communicate it to somebody else. And so that's something that's really hard about running a freelance business where you're working with other people that you're trying to build into an agency, but it's iterative. And so I guess I'm here to tell you, like, Rome wasn't built in a day. An agency, I'm probably a year plus into the process now, and I don't feel done, but I feel like I've made a lot of progress day by day. And so, you know, it just starts with like doing it one day and keep building on that. So don't get discouraged if it feels like it's taking a lot of time or that you have to, you know, create a lot of documentation for your team to follow. That really is the process. So a couple ways to think about how you could delegate tasks to other people or tasks that you might want to automate where, you know, you're kind of using a computer tool to do that. First of all, anything that's time consuming. So like I told you about bookkeeping. I think you could also think about stuff like social media. You know, like maybe you could hire somebody to do the scheduling for you or to create the content itself or to create imagery for you or something like that. Just so that you're not in charge of making sure that your agency's marketing moves forward. Because I think as marketers, which I'm sure like a lot of you are on this presentation today, it's really easy to neglect your own marketing while you're doing marketing for your clients. But it's so important to, you know, put that best face forward for your brand. Like, you know, we don't just care about this for you, we care about it for us too. It's also tasks that are low value. So I'm trying to think of a good example, but like anything admin related is probably low value. It's probably something you could have somebody else do. So like for me, not that it's a low value task to my business, but for me personally, I would say like the project management tasks, like following up with my writers and editors and making sure that they're on track and checking in on things that are overdue. That's a low value task for me. It's very important to my business, but I don't need to do that. I could hire someone to effectively do that on my behalf. Specialty and occasional services, the bookkeeping thing is a perfect example of this. So it's kind of like anything where specialized knowledge would be a benefit. I think another example is like, I needed some help with setting up like a workflow in MailChimp or something like that. And I could probably figure it out if I have a couple hours, but I don't always have a couple hours. So hiring somebody who already knows that I can pay and I can budget for, and I can know that it's going to get done to my specifications is something that's really like worth it to me. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind, which is just that with unlimited time, you could learn everything, right? Like we could probably all like figure out how to do brain surgery and be a rocket scientist if we had unlimited time. But that's not necessarily going to be useful to my business. So I'm not going to try to do that. And the same can be said about like setting up whatever that MailChimp thing was that I needed help with. And then I think this last one is a really good use case for automation specifically, which is like transferring or entering data from one application to another. So it's like this idea that kind of brought us the usefulness of tools like Zapier, where like that's what it exists to do, is connecting different applications. We're going to talk a little bit more about how I specifically do that within my business. But the idea is that if you're automating those specific types of tasks, you're eliminating the chance for human error, because it's really easy to go from like one thing to another, copy paste, but maybe you copy pasted something wrong. You know, maybe you I don't know. There's just so many different things that could happen if you're doing a lot of those types of tasks. So this is kind of an interesting image about how long you can work on making a routine task more efficient before you're spending more time than you save. And it's like kind of confusing to look at. So once I send these slides out, I would recommend clicking on the link with the explanation. This picture is originally from this online comic that's very popular called XKCD, but the explanation kind of goes into a little bit more. It's a lot to look at, even for somebody who's like a visual person like me. But the idea is that if you're going to put together a process automation, you want it to be for something that is going to pay off for you in the long term, because it's like a task that you do all the time. So that's all this really means. All right, so one thing that made a big difference for me when I was taking my business from freelancer to agency, when I started working with a lot of different people, was the importance of selecting a good project management tool to work with all these people. And I think it's worth saying that it's not so much the tool that's important, but it's like the way that you set it up, the way you use it. So I'm going to advocate for one specifically because it just fits me very well, and I'll explain why. But before we get into that, I want to talk about some of the components that I considered before settling on one. So I think first and foremost, you want to think about stuff like task management, like how am I going to communicate my expectations to somebody on my team in a way that it's going to work for all these different types of roles, the writers, the editors, the project manager, etc. You know, how can I communicate due dates? Are there related tasks that, you know, maybe somebody else is working on, but that this other person needs to be aware of? You know, can I leave comments and stuff? You know, like how useful is this tool going to be for moving the project forward is kind of what this whole task management part gets into. There's also the user interface. So I was using this tool for a while called Freecamp, and I think it's a really cool tool, but the user interface is a little bit dated. And not only that, the way that they had notifications set up, even the way that you could customize them, still somehow resulted in like 100 notification emails from this project management tool, like on a daily basis. And I knew like my contractors hated me while we were using that tool. And so I felt like kind of some anxiety about it, because I thought it was mostly a good solution, but it was also like creating new problems that didn't really need to exist. So just a couple of different things to think about. In the past, I've considered chat as part of a project management tool, but I've since come to realize that using a tool like Slack has been a lot more efficient, and having like a separate tool for project management. So, you know, it's something to consider, but don't choose a project management tool because they have a good chat, but everything else is not good. Time tracking is also important. It is something that I'm now handling in Slack as well. So there's ways around it. I think one thing to consider is if you're working with like a lot of independent contractors who aren't necessarily employees of your agency, you want to consider like how can you condense all the functionality you need out of these tools into like maybe like 3 tools total that you use that they have to log into. You know, there might be others that you're granting access to because they need that for client project or to get certain functionality. But I don't want my contractors, who aren't even my full-time employees, to have to be like managing all these logins and having to do that in addition to like whatever other jobs they're doing. Document management is also important. Like, where are we storing like our working files? You know, what if a client has their own style guide they want us to use? What if they have like, you know, what if they filled out an intake form that gives people a little bit more detail about what they do that would be useful for the writer? So that was something I used to also manage within Freecamp, but I've since decided to manage that as a separate thing within, I use Notion now for my intranet. So for all those like files that we're referring back to. And so kind of the way that I have it set up now is I use this tool called Process Street for my project or like task management stuff. So that's why I've labeled this slide process management, because instead of using a project management tool, I'm using like a process management tool. And we're going to get into what that means very soon. But anyway, the idea is that I'm sort of isolating these different things, like the chat and the communications all in Slack, the document storage is all in Notion, and then the tasks themselves and what my expectations are for the people who work for me are all in Process Street. So just something to, a couple of things to consider while you're sort of building up your team, how you're going to work together, how you're going to communicate with each other. And I will say that I really fought using Slack for a long time because I think it's really annoying, honestly, like all the notifications. But I'm really happy that I decided to use it because it has been a great tool for allowing my contractors to get in touch with each other and just solve issues quickly. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, the automation side of things, and also kind of the delegation side of things, which is how to create process documentation to help you scale. So what's a process? Basically, it's a series of steps that can be easily and repeatedly followed by a qualified user. The reason that I say by a qualified user specifically is because if we go back to the part of the presentation where I'm talking about things like specialty tasks like accounting or MailChimp expertise, there is a certain level of expertise someone needs to bring into using my processes for writers, for editors, etc. That background education that I didn't teach them, that they already have, in order for them to be effective. So I'm not writing processes in terms of like trying to like teach a whole, like writing, like how to do writing in general. Like that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to teach them how to write for the Blogsmith clients. And so that's really important to keep in mind. Like, what is the breadth of information that you're going to share within your process documentation? And, maybe I think it's worth mentioning that you could always like link out to other sources if there's a topic that's related but not worth expanding on. But just keep in mind relevance. So process documentation, kind of taking this to the next step, involves written documents with things like annotated screenshots or screen recordings that walk through user interfaces. So one thing that I've learned that might help you to start using this, if it sounds a little bit intimidating, is to just like do whatever the thing is that you would like love to delegate and get off your plate. So for example, and we'll go through a way that I do this, but so like I outsource my social media management to a member of my team, and they create the content and the imagery and they do the scheduling. And so like what I did in order to teach them how to do that was to record myself doing it and kind of talk through it. And then when I was done recording it, you could take that video file you create, that screen share, and you could run that through like a transcription service and get a written version of that. And then you could have the person who you want to do this in order to learn it in a different way, take that transcription or that video or both, and then basically like format a process document that says this is exactly how to do it step by step with screenshots and things like that. So that's a really good way to reinforce whatever like lesson process you're trying to teach. And I think it also makes it easy to just do it, because I think people get really in their heads about sort of, realizing that they have something they want to delegate and then trying to put that on a page and writing it. I think a lot gets lost when you start with writing it versus just trying to talk through it and interacting with elements and making realizations about, how you use that tool, but you might not sort of consciously realize. So just to kind of reiterate, the main process automation tools that I use are, again, Process Street, and that's mostly because that's where everything lives. That's kind of where everything starts with my team. So, whatever tool you're using, it might be different, but the connector is Zapier. And so Zapier connects what I'm doing in Process Street to a lot of the other tools I use. And I'm going to give you a couple examples as we go through here. So the way that Process Street works, just to kind of give you like a high level example and understanding of it, if this is a new concept to you, is that they let you create templates. So these are your SOP, your process docs, your scope of, or now I'm blanking on what SOP means, statement of purpose. It's something like that, but basically it means a process document. And so Process Street allows you to create templates of your processes, and you can kind of see an example here. This is part of my, actually a little bit outdated, but my blog content process. Whenever we have a new blog post that we're writing for a client, it starts in Process Street. And I just fill out all the information on this like first task here that you see highlighted. And everything builds from that. The writers, the editors, the project manager, I have someone who helps me with keyword research, they all use the same interface. And so, yeah, just to kind of finish the explanation of what Process Street is and how it works, you create a template and you run a checklist for each new instance of that. So each new blog post would be a checklist from this base template that you see here. And it's just a really cool tool because you can set due dates that are based on other due dates. For example, like you could say this task is due one day after the previous task was checked. So to give another example of that, if I basically, the process is I have writers outline something before they draft it because I want to approve them. And then I have edits, due the day after writing. So every due date on this checklist is based on when the draft is due. And then I can say like a day before, a day after. And then I don't have to input those things individually. So that's what's really cool about this tool is I can set it up to automatically assign certain tasks to certain people on certain dates, but I don't have to manually do that for every new task. And so that was something that was really important to me as I was scaling up and doing it on my own, but yes, with help. I didn't want to get caught in the day-to-day minute details. And that's one way to do it, is to use a great tool that helps you to quickly scale the process of assigning out new work to multiple different team members. Here's some of the apps that I connect to Process Street and Zapier. Slack, we've talked a little bit about that. Slack is a great tool besides the fact that the notifications are annoying because it lets you connect to a lot of apps even without Zapier. Like there's a lot of native connections to Slack from within tools like Notion, which I also use and is also listed here. So just to give you a couple examples with how those like built-in automations with Slack work, or those like native automations, in Notion, I have a document that represents the Blogsmith style guide. And then I have my project manager update it whenever we have an update to the style guide. And there's a specific channel on Slack called like announcements or style guide changes or something like that. And whenever we change it, the channel gets a ping that there's a new change. And so that's a really great way for me to communicate with my writers. I need you to review this. This is new. Without having to email them or annoy them or point out every single detail. They can kind of self-service get that information. Another like Slack integration that I have, this one might actually be through Zapier, but I use this plugin called Forminator. It's a WPMU dev plugin. They have like a membership where you get access to a bunch of different ones if you're in the membership. And they have it set up so that you can ping Slack whenever someone fills out a certain contact form. So now I'm using Slack whenever somebody fills out like my contact form and that they're interested in, working together on content writing. So that way I see it right away, even if I'm not checking my email. So those are just a couple of ways to think about it. Notion, as I said before, I use as my intranet, and also, like I said, I connect it to Slack for updates, not just on that, but on other things as well that are relevant to the business. And then Clust is another tool that I'm using with Zapier, and I basically use it for various onboarding tasks. So whether I'm onboarding a new client and I need to get like an intake form from them that tells me a little bit more about their business, who their competition is, who their target audience is, things like that. Other sort of like accounting details, just those things that like it's relevant to every client, but I might forget it if I didn't have it in the systematized flow. It's also for working with new writers or editors or other team members. I want to have them sign an NDA for working with me because we are dealing in some sensitive client information. I want them to sign a working agreement that just agrees to like what I'm paying them, what the working conditions are, things like that. And also it's kind of a reminder within that workflow of onboarding to sign up for these different tools that we use, like Slack, like Notion, etc. So all of these things together help me to stay on top of important things like new client stuff coming in that I need to respond to, as well as all the things that I need from my new writers and new clients in order to provide a good experience for them. So now we're going to go through a couple different examples of automations that I've put together. They're pretty simple, honestly. Like, these are things that you could definitely build without too much trouble. The limit's really your imagination. So after this presentation, I would recommend like just playing around and seeing like if anything inspires you from my workflow, or if you can think of any solutions based on different apps you're using, like just play around, because that's what I did in order to sort of figure out how to use Zapier. And I also want to say that I started a Zapier Meetup with a couple friends. It's called Automation with Zapier, and it's on meetup.com. So if this is something that you nerd out about and you want to learn a little bit more and connect with other people who are going through the same things, trying to figure it out, definitely check that out. We have another meetup happening in like a couple weeks. Okay, so this first example is I use this tool called Design Pickle. I guess it's not a tool so much as a service. They create graphic designs. You can fill up your queue with bunch of different requests. And so I have my writers, I give them direct access to my Design Pickle account so they can put in requests. And I have it set up so that whenever, actually a couple of different things set up. So whenever a new design is ready, this particular Zap moves that design to a specific folder in Google Drive, just so I have all those assets in one place. It's nice to have kind of a repository of everything they've created for me without having to go into their website and sort of search through those old files. I don't know if I have a screenshot of it, but I have a very similar Zap setup where whenever a new Design Pickle file is ready, it goes to a certain Slack channel, and then my writers can just grab it from Slack. They don't have to sign into Design Pickle. They don't have to go to this Google Drive. It's right where they're already working. So some of the best automations are for things like that, where it's like, yeah, that person could log in, it'd probably take them an extra 1 or 2 minutes in order to grab that stuff. But honestly, time is money, time is energy too. And the more little steps that you have to take or members of your team have to take to get something done, the lower quality output, just because it's like higher cognitive load. That's all it is. So this is just to kind of circle back on Clus, because we talked a little bit about that. So basically what's happening with this app that I set up is whenever I get to the stage where either I'm ready to start working with a new client, like they've signed a contract, they've given me a verbal yes that they want to move forward, something like that, I can just check one of those tasks in process tree. And let me just go back for a second to show you what that looks like. Well, okay, so this is a template, not a checklist, but if this was a checklist, there'd be like a little checkbox, where this like number 1 is highlighted. So imagine that, I'm checking one of those tasks off. So then it automatically sends information over to Clus, the client's name, the client's email, the client's company, and it fills out some stuff within this like onboarding flow I have for them so that I don't have to do that. And again, this would probably take me a minute or 2 to do myself. But the cool thing is like, I don't even have to think about it, because all I have to do is check it, and then it happens and it automatically sends a notification to the client that I have some things that I need from them. And really it's reducing human error is what it is. And I have the same thing for my new writers. So I have a template set up and I run a checklist every time there's a new writer that I am sending like a test project to and that I'm considering hiring to work on my team. And so once we get to that stage where I'm ready to move forward, again, I check off the task and it sends over their name and all their information, and it pings that person and that their like Quest onboarding thing is ready. And so again, it's like, I don't have to do anything extra. And that just, it saves me a lot of time and energy. Okay, so this is actually one of the first apps I ever set up, but it's super useful. And it basically connects my Gmail account to HubSpot. So I use HubSpot CRM. It's a free CRM tool. For those who are unfamiliar, that just means customer relationship management tool. And it's something that you would use kind of from a sales, business development perspective, but like something that as an agency owner, you would probably also want to use to make sure that you are regularly following up with and staying in contact with current clients. So it's just a tool to organize contact information and like different stages you're at in terms of like the sales process, you know, like whether they're a closed one client, you have a contract, or, you know, maybe you just gave a presentation to them and so you're still trying to kind of move them forward. So anyway, the way that this works is whenever I get a new email, I can add a certain label to it that I've already set up, and the label is called something like add to HubSpot CRM. So whenever you're setting up these like triggers, as Zapier calls them, the input that causes the resulting action, you want to set them up in a way that makes semantic sense, just basically describing the action. The same thing with Zaps. It's important to name them, and like my names that you're seeing here could probably be better because some of these are older Zaps that I haven't updated in a while, but you know, describe like exactly what you're trying to do. You can even label the individual steps to make those make a little bit more sense. So before you get too deep into automation, use good naming mechanisms because you're going to be playing around with a lot of different things and copying Zaps, and you want to make sure that it's easy to find the one that you're trying to edit or you know, make sense of. So anyway, this Zap, whenever I add a specific label, it automatically adds that email and like any information it can scrape from there to my HubSpot CRM so that I don't have to manually input it, which is just a beautiful thing. And it encourages me to use my CRM because the problem with CRMs is a lot of people just like don't use them. They use them for a while and then they get bored or it gets overwhelming or whatever. And so a CRM is only as useful as the information it contains, and this makes it a lot more useful. Okay, so this is something that I added recently, and again, the label could be a lot better because I added it in a hurry, but we're all human, so you know, always room to improve. But anyway, this automation happens when I think it's part of that main blog checklist that I showed you guys earlier, but it happens, I think it's triggered like 2 weeks after I send a new blog post to a client, and I'm assuming at that point that it's been published. So for some clients, we're uploading stuff to their content management system, and for some clients, they're doing it themselves. So sometimes I am in control of when an article goes live, and sometimes I'm not. But I'm making the assumption that probably 2 weeks after I send an article, that they're probably publishing it. And so this task is actually triggered much later because this task refers to updating that article and when it might make sense to take another look at it and see if we need to make any changes to it, because just like a little bit of an aside about SEO, Google likes really fresh content, especially in the technology space and marketing and things like that. And so you always have to be thinking about, I published this, but what could I do to make it better so that it continues to rank high in relevant search, and that so somebody else who's doing a good job of updating their articles doesn't overtake us. So that's what this is. It's a reminder. It creates a calendar reminder in Google to look back at that article and see what could be updated. And this is something that you could probably handle really well on like a Google Sheet, but having that reminder in your calendar will be really hard to ignore. So that's why I set this up. Okay, so this is one of my favorite automations that I've made for my business. And it goes back to the social media management side of things. So I've been using Buffer. I'm actually using Publer now for most social media management stuff, but I still have the Buffer free plan specifically for this automation, which the way that it's set up in Process Street, I have a checklist template where each task is a day of the week. And then within each task, there's fields for things like the social copy for Twitter and the social copy for Facebook and LinkedIn. I have those the same for right now. It also has fields for a Twitter image for each day, and then a Facebook, LinkedIn image for each day. And then finally, there is a date and time field. And so the person who does my social media on my team goes in and fills all that stuff out. I go in and approve it. And then all I have to do is check a task on Process Street, and all that information routes over to Buffer, the copy for each network, the images for each network on the right day at the right time. And this saves me so much time because like, I hope honestly that Buffer doesn't see this presentation because they don't have an approvals feature, and this is like my workaround for that. So I can approve stuff before it goes there. But you know, I think this is something, Buffer is just a tool I use. You could use, I'm sure there's other, maybe even Promo Republic would facilitate this process if you guys have a Zapier connection. But the idea is just that I can sort of workshop the social copy and the imagery within Process Street where I'm already doing all this other stuff. And then when it's ready to schedule, like, I don't have to go into another tool to do it. So that's the whole point of that. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. We talked a lot about process documentation. Here's just a couple examples of what that looks like. There's the style guide that I talked about, and it's something that has been a very iterative process. I've built it over time. It's taken a while, but I'm so happy that I just started it because it's been really useful to my business. Different like hiring documentation, like the onboarding flow, even just like the stuff that I'm sending out to potential writers in terms of like what my expectations are. And then like the onboarding steps and different training are a couple of things to think about when you are scaling your business up. This is a really cool tool for recording your process. It's called Scribe by a company called Cursive. And what happens is you just hit this button, record, and you go about, you do your task, you know, you click on different things and it takes screenshots of every click. And then you can go in and add text on top of that to sort of describe the screenshot and the process. So this is a really cool tool, again, for capturing those processes if you're having trouble writing it out and making sense of it. Just a couple more things on how and like why automation can increase your earnings. We've talked about how it helps you avoid human error. We've also talked about like the cognitive load of switching between different tools and tasks. So helping you save time and effort. And then the last one's really important, avoiding becoming an information gatekeeper, especially like that design Pickle app I showed you guys, just having it so that people can access it within Slack so that they don't have to log into anything else. They don't have to go through me to get it. That just makes my life easier. I don't want to hold anyone up by being like the person who holds all the knowledge. I want it to be really easy to access. So by doing these things, I've been able to grow my freelance business from like $10,000 to $15,000 months to now over $30,000 months and growing. And it's all because of the stuff that we've talked about here today. I will say that if you want to create consistency, you've got to create predictability by using retainer agreements that are paid in full ahead of starting work. Then you can start to forecast your revenue and how many team members you need. So we are going to end up here. You can contact me either on Twitter at Maddy Osman if you have any questions or want to, chat after this. And then my email is Maddy@Blogsmith. And then I'm going to turn things over. I got to refresh this actually after our edition. I'm going to turn it over to Paul for talking a little bit more about Promo Republic.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation, Maddy. It was super interesting and exciting to hear all this information. Like really a lot of automation. It's super great. It's super cool that we can really share it with our community. Yeah, so in terms of Promo Republic, in case some of the webinar attendees are not using our software at this stage, you can learn more about our product. We'll add links to the follow-up email, plus you'll be able to schedule a one-on-one call with me if you want to have an A to Z overview. But we proudly position ourselves as an A to Z product for organic social media marketing automation, and we cover pretty much all of the processes that are related to social media marketing automation, from content scheduling, creation, analytics, managing your comments and inbox messages, and up to client collaboration and approval flow. So yeah, you'll be able to find more information in the follow-up email. I think now we can jump directly to the Q&A session, because I'm sure people will have some questions. Plus, I also have one question. So all this automation, it's super important, but could you please tell us your opinion on what's the right timing for the automation? Because we have like a lot of experienced agencies joining this webinar today, but sometimes people who are just starting out, having their own agency, and they have 1 or 2 clients, they're thinking about, okay, as of now, I can do everything manually, and then later on, when I have more clients, I'll think about the automation. How do you think, whether it's really important to have automation from the very beginning, or you can really have it down the road later?
Sure. And I also want to say I'm a Promo Republic subscriber for, you know, anyone that matters to. I think it's a great tool, and there's so much that you could do with it. In terms of answering that question, so I don't think that there's a bad time to start automating. I would say that it definitely helps to have a good grasp of your processes and being able to articulate them before you try to take that step. So I think it would be a mistake to jump straight to something like Zapier and just start building something without having a reason or, you know, kind of like guidelines in your head or on paper about how you would do that. So start, whatever stage you're in, start by just like writing it out. Make the process document before you try to automate it.
Okay, yeah, that makes it all sense. I think we can jump directly to the questions that we have in the Q&A section. So there is a question from the anonymous attendee. Why do you prefer Process Street over something like Asana?
Asana is cool. So a couple of my clients use Asana. And I think that Asana is the type of thing that is good for agencies. And I think it lends really well to content creation, like editorial calendar style. But kind of like I was talking about throughout the presentation, sort of like a typical project management tool, just I've found doesn't work perfectly for my business. And I think it is really personal. Like, I'm not going to recommend one tool and say that it's going to work for you, because I don't know that. But what I can tell you is, besides some of the things I've already touched on, I think you really need to look for a tool that allows you to customize it for your needs. So you want to look for things like custom fields or different views, like different ways to set it up, because everybody's needs are different. And ultimately, you know, the existing tools on the market, they might not change fast enough for, you know, whatever your requests are. So you want to have something that you can kind of build from.
That's cool. Yeah. Asana is a super interesting system. Yeah, but you're like saying that
it's a great tool. There's nothing wrong with it. Just
exactly. The tool is awesome. Okay, we have another question here. What's the roadmap for PR in the next 3 months? So
I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, sure. That's for sure, mate. So yeah, we will release the updated version of the reporting until the end of this month, and we'll also implement a couple of, we'll customize it and make it even a bit better in the later future. And we're also releasing social inbox right now. It should also be released until the end of this month, and then we'll also optimize it a bit later on. This is the feature that will give you the ability to reply to comments and inbox DM messages directly from the system without going to any other place. So basically, you'll be able to start offering your clients not only content scheduling across their social media channels, but also managing their brand reputation and answering all of the comments that they're receiving directly from a Republic agency platform. Another question that we have is how to design automation. So as I understand, someone is asking like, what kind of tools do you need to pick up? But as I understand, as I mentioned at the beginning, to design automation, you really need to follow follow like some sort of an influencer and then start working with a couple of clients who could give you feedback, and then you'll really pick up a set of the tools that is working for you, right?
Yeah, and so I think I would add, besides Zapier, there are other tools that'll help you connect multiple tools together. Integromat is kind of the next level of Zapier. I can't speak to that. I have not used it, but I've heard a lot of great things about it. And then a step below, or like to the side maybe, is If This Then That. A lot of people use that tool more for personal automations than I guess business automations. But I think the name of it is a good framework to keep in mind when you're considering creating an automation. If a certain trigger occurs, if, you know, for example, like just to go back to some of my Zaps, if I mark an email with a certain label, then the action is that it's going to be added to my HubSpot CRM. So think in terms of triggers and resulting actions. And that's a good way to start sort of like wrapping your head around automations.
That's great. Super interesting. Okay, let me check whether we have any other questions left here. Yeah, I think we have. Anyone has any questions, you can write them down right now in the Q&A section. Okay, yeah, I think that's it. Maddy, okay. Okay, I'm in Auckland, CA. I'm interested in reselling the platform. Yeah, Marco, I'll provide you with more information on that right after this meeting. I'll send you a follow-up email. Just let me, okay.
I think I see another question that could be interesting. Adam says, for the uninitiated, what goes in the style guide? So great question. The way that I have mine set up is by several different sections. So it's things like, how do we style links? What kind of wording do we use to communicate a link? How do we style bullet points, lists? How do we use headings? How do I write a descriptive heading? It's things like word choice. What are words we avoid? What are words we tend to use? It's things like clarifying spelling on certain things like e-commerce. What is our standard way of using it? Because otherwise we get e/-commerce. We just get e-commerce, no dash. And, you know, it's different across every article. So the way that you want to think about a style guide, if you're wanting to create one for your brand, which I highly recommend whether you do content creation or not as like a service, is to think about what are things that are important to keep consistent, and what are, you can figure that out by seeing things that people make errors on if you have different team members who approach it a different way.
I think that's perfectly answers the question. We have another 2 questions coming. So the first one is from Mark. He is asking, do you need to start as a freelancer or start building the agency brand from the very beginning?
I think it would be hard to start with an agency. I think you should always be thinking in terms of building a brand, for sure. So think about, when you're a freelancer, having a name for your business that's not just your name. Because if you do want to scale to an agency model, then your name might not, it may or may not translate well to that. But the idea of an agency is it's like bigger than just you. So your brand should reflect that, and you should be thinking about the branding from the beginning, whether you're ready to, you know, actually execute on an agency model or not at that point.
We have another question coming from Bobby, who is asking, what was the biggest lever you pulled when going from around 3-4K mark to get to the 10K mark?
I don't know if this is going to be a perfect answer to your question, but I think like the first couple years of me freelancing, it was all about building reputation. And however I could do that, like just doing really good work for clients so that they would recommend their friends and their colleagues to me. It was doing things like, specifically as a content writer, finding guest post opportunities. So like one of my first like big client / guest posting situations that I had like in my first year as a freelancer was regularly contributing to Search Engine Journal. And It's not something that they pay me for, but it's something that has resulted in paid work. And so to me, that's been good, both from a business perspective, but also from a reputation perspective. And so I think honestly, like, that's the secret to be getting more money, is you have to build a really solid reputation. That reputation will result in referrals, but it'll also result in trust, because in order to get people to like be willing to pay that retainer up front, they got to be hearing a lot of great things from other people in their industry. You got to deliver great work. And so I think the other thing is, like, you could build up to that. So you could start with a client where they're paying, you know, the invoice like due on receipt after you did the work, or, you know, maybe you get like half up front and then you get half at the end of the month. But after you've proven yourself with that client, say 3 months of like really consistent great work where you're getting good feedback, like, push for that retainer. You don't have to wait for the next client.
Yeah, that's an awesome strategy for sure. I mean, anyways, there is no way you can start immediately like with building everyone up front for your services. But once you have kind of trust with the client and high reputation, then for sure you can do that later on.
Definitely.
That's an awesome advice. Okay, guys, do you have any other questions? Yeah, there are a lot of people who are telling, thank you, Maddy, thanks.
I hope that you at least learned one good bit here today that you could take into making your business better. If you did, then it was worth it.
Yeah, I'm sure they did, because you talked a lot about automation, a lot of insights, a lot of useful things.
Good.
That's super awesome that we can have you today to talk about this thing. Okay, it seems like no other questions are coming. So guys, thanks a lot for joining this webinar today. We appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot. And we'll send you the follow-up email with the link to the presentation and more details about Promo Republic to those people who are not using it so far. So yeah, if you'll have any kind of questions, just reply to that email that will come from us right after this webinar, and we wish you to have a wonderful day and week ahead.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for hosting me, and thanks for everybody for listening, and stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Maddy. We appreciate your time. Thanks a lot for being here with us today, and we also wish you to have a wonderful day and week ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye.